All right, so are you ready to really up your game when it comes to describing people?
I'm ready.
I think this is going to be really helpful for all of us.
Yeah.
This deep dive is all about how to describe people in English, but in a way that's super vivid and memorable and, not just basic labels.
Right.
We're talking about painting a picture with words.
Yeah.
And to help us do that, we've got this really fun podcast episode that we're going to dive into and pull out all the gems.
It's interesting, isn't it?
What's that?
How we often settle for just simple descriptions like tall or
Yeah,
nice.
totally.
When we could be using language that really brings out who they are.
Totally.
Their essence.
Yeah, it's so true. It's instead of saying someone has an athletic build, which is fine.
Right.
But what if we got specific?
Yeah.
The source material of the podcast uses that example.
Okay.
And I'm already thinking, okay, athletic, but how?
Right.
Like a marathon runner,
Yes.
a gymnast,
Uh-huh.
a power lifter.
Okay.
Each one of those conjures a different image in my head, right?
Yeah.
Totally different body type.
You get a much clearer picture.
For sure.
It's the small details that matter.
Absolutely.
It's those specific details
Right.
that really make someone imagine the person that you're describing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like instead of just piercing blue eyes,
Yeah.
you might add framed by dark, thick eyebrows that give them an intense look.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm getting chills. That's good.
You see,
This is what I love.
you get the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I think it's easy to get stuck on physical appearances.
Sure. Right. Absolutely.
And the Source podcast does a really nice job of moving us into personality descriptions.
Yeah.
And that's where things get, extra interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
They use these contrasting pairs of traits, which I thought was really smart.
Yeah.
Like outgoing versus reserved, or optimistic versus pessimistic.
What I think is great about that approach is that it makes you think about personality on a spectrum. So rather than saying someone is friendly, you have to think about, are they the type of friendly that makes friends with everyone on the bus?
Yeah.
Or more of a warm-up, slowly kind of friendly?
It makes you think about degrees, right?
Exactly.
Because we all know people who fall at different points on that friendly spectrum.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of this party scenario that they use in the podcast to illustrate this.
Okay.
They introduce these two characters, Alex, who is described as outgoing and charismatic.
And Sam, who's thoughtful and reserved.
Exactly.
I think what's really clever there is how they use multiple descriptors for each person.
Oh, interesting.
It's not just one-word labels.
I see.
And it creates a richer, more complete picture.
Yeah, you get a sense of them as a person.
Yeah.
All right, so now I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
Think of two people you know really well,
Right.
maybe even total opposites in terms of their personalities.
Okay.
How would you use these contrasting traits to describe them?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Let's say one person is incredibly organized.
Right?
Always planning ahead, maybe even a bit of a perfectionist.
All right.
Whereas the other one is more spontaneous.
Okay.
Goes with the flow,
Right.
embraces the unexpected.
Got it.
Even just those two things, you start to get a sense of how different their approaches to life are.
And that probably impacts everything from how they approach a work project to how they plan a vacation.
Exactly.
I'm already hooked. But before we get too carried away with our imaginary friends,
Yeah.
the podcast also touches on those classic type A and type B personalities.
Right.
Which I feel like we've all heard of.
Yeah, for sure.
But maybe we don't always totally understand them.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear what they have to say about that.
Yeah. And it's important to remember with those type A and type B categories, they're more like guidelines than strict rules.
Right, right.
Most people don't fit neatly into one or the other.
That's so true. Like even myself, I can think of times where, it's more about recognizing certain tendencies.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I might be a super organized planner when it comes to work projects,
Right.
but then totally laid back about my weekend plans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's nice is that the podcast really makes a point of saying that neither type is better than the other.
Okay.
They each have their own strengths and challenges.
That's a really good point. So it's not about being type A or type B. It's about okay, in what areas of your life do you lean towards type A tendencies?
Yes.
And where do you embrace a little bit more of that type B?
Right. Yeah. You got it.
Now you're thinking like a true personality analyst.
There you go.
And speaking of analysis, the Source podcast has this really fun quiz that they do where they challenge the listeners to identify key personality traits based on a really short description of a person.
Okay, yeah?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
It was like these mini mysteries. So one of the descriptions was, this person is always on time, hates clutter, and loves to plan everything in advance.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
I'm sure most people listening are already thinking, type A.
That's a classic.
Right.
Yes.
But what I thought was really valuable was how the podcast then breaks down why.
Yes.
Why those clues point to that type A personality.
Exactly. They help us to understand how to think through the process of understanding personalities.
Oh, yeah. It's not just about memorizing a list of traits. It's about learning to read between the lines.
Yeah.
And see the connections between behavior and personality.
Yeah, exactly. Connect the dots.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned earlier describing people is more of an art than a science, and that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
The podcast emphasized capturing what makes someone special.
Yeah.
Right? Not just listing off traits.
Right.
But like finding those words that truly convey their individuality.
Right.
How do you approach that challenge?
I think it really starts with being genuinely curious about people.
Okay.
So instead of just observing their outward behavior,
Okay.
try to think about like what's going on under the surface.
Right. What are their motivations?
Exactly. What makes them tick.
Totally. That actually reminds me of something else they highlighted.
Okay.
They talked about the power of using evocative language.
Yeah.
And they described one person as a natural comedian.
Yes.
And it just instantly brought that person to life.
Yeah.
You could practically picture them cracking jokes and making people laugh.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Totally.
How like a single word can just paint such a vivid picture.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And they also said someone was adventurous.
Right.
And it evoked this sense of excitement, you know?
Yeah. Love of exploring.
Totally. A desire to explore the world, embrace new experiences.
Yeah, for sure.
And it made me realize that describing people isn't just about accuracy. It's also about sparking an emotional response in the listener. Right. It's like we want them to feel like they're getting to know this person.
Exactly.
Understanding what makes them unique and interesting.
It's about sharing your perception of them.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes the most effective descriptions are the ones that focus on a single striking detail.
Yes.
Instead of listing a dozen generic adjectives,
Yes.
you zero in on that one quality that truly defines them.
Yeah.
So instead of saying someone is smart, funny, and kind, you might say they have a mischievous twinkle in their eye that hints at a hidden depth.
You see, like you're giving the listener a keyhole glimpse into their soul.
It's like you're reading my mind. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
This is making me want to go back and reread all my favorite novels and pay attention to how the authors are describing characters.
Yes.
But here's something I'm curious about.
Okay.
They mention that the language we use to describe people is constantly evolving.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
How do we stay current and sensitive to those changes?
I think that's such an important point because language is always changing.
Yeah.
And what may have been considered an acceptable descriptor in the past could be totally outdated today.
Totally.
Or even worse, offensive.
Right.
So you have to be really careful.
So it's not just about learning a list of vocabulary words.
Right.
We've got to be mindful of the cultural context.
Yeah.
Be willing to adapt our language as needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's an ongoing process.
It is.
What's so fascinating to me is how, as our understanding of human psychology and identity evolves, our language for describing those nuances also evolves.
It does.
It's like we're constantly refining our ability to express the complexities of the human experience.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us back to that question we were talking about earlier. How do we use language to truly honor the individuality of others? It's not just about the words themselves. It's about the intention and the awareness behind them.
You've got it. Yeah. It's about describing someone with respect, empathy, and really a desire to show what makes them unique and wonderful.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired.
Good.
Ready to go into the final part of our deep dive?
I am.
I'm so eager to hear what other insights they have for us on this topic.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm still like reeling from that idea of honoring someone's individuality through our descriptions.
It's a big challenge.
It's like a high bar to set for ourselves.
It is.
But the podcast actually gave some really practical advice that I thought was super helpful.
Yeah, they talked about observation a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And how important it is.
Really being observant.
Yeah, and not just passively looking at someone.
Okay.
But actively noticing the details that reveal their character.
Right.
Small things.
Like, what is their posture like? Do they make direct eye contact, or are they more hesitant? What are their hands doing while they're talking?
Exactly.
I feel like we often miss those cues because we're so focused on what we're going to say next.
Yeah, we're not really present.
Right. We
Yeah.
forget to see the person.
Yes.
And those little details probably tell us way more than any like grand pronouncements about their personality.
Much more.
It reminds me of that saying, actions speak louder than words. Maybe we need to rephrase that for describing people and be like, subtle actions speak volumes.
That's a good one. I like that.
And the podcast also highlighted the importance of context.
Right.
Like the way we describe someone is going to naturally change depending on if we're talking about them in a professional setting.
Yeah.
Or a casual conversation, or even like in a piece of writing.
Right. Different situations call for different descriptions.
Yeah, it's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
You know, you wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb, and you wouldn't use a scalpel to chop wood.
Right.
You've got to have the right tool. And in the same way, we need to be thoughtful about our language choices when describing people.
Yeah, for sure.
Like sometimes a formal, detailed description is going to be the most appropriate. Right. And other times, a single evocative phrase is all you need.
Right.
I'm thinking about how in a job interview, you might describe yourself as highly organized and results-oriented.
Yeah.
But to a friend, you might be like, I'm such a control freak, but at least I get things done.
Totally different.
Right. Totally different context. That actually brings me to another technique they mentioned.
What's that?
They talked about the power of focusing on a single striking detail.
Okay.
Sometimes less is more.
Yes.
Can you give me an example?
Like, say you want to describe someone who has a really amazing voice.
Okay, yeah.
So instead of listing off all these adjectives like deep, resonant, soothing, you might just say, when they speak, it's like honey dripping from a silver spoon.
Oh my gosh, that is beautiful.
You see?
Yeah.
You get a much better sense.
I can practically hear that voice in my head now.
Yeah.
It's like you've bypassed all those like logical descriptive words and gone straight to the heart of the experience.
That's the point.
Yeah, and that's where the art of describing people comes alive.
Exactly.
It's about using language to evoke an emotion.
Yes.
To create a sensory experience for whoever's listening.
That's exactly right.
It's not just about describing them, it's like inviting people to share in our perception of them.
It is.
Which is powerful.
It is powerful because you're taking the time to really see someone.
Yeah.
And then use the right words to express what you see.
Yeah, so we create this connection that's way more than just surface level.
Yes, for sure.
And then maybe, just maybe, we inspire other people to see that person in a whole new light.
That's a good goal.
That is a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to encourage everyone listening to keep practicing.
Yeah.
Keep experimenting.
Definitely.
But above all, keep paying attention to all those amazing people around us.
Yeah, that's the key.
Right.
Yeah, the world's full of interesting people.
So just never underestimate the power of a well-chosen word
No, you're right.
to capture what makes someone special.
Yeah, and make them come alive in the imagination of others.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery.
It's been fun.
We'll catch you in the next episode.